Have you ever been pulled over and felt your stomach drop the second those blue lights hit your mirror? Most drivers immediately start talking, apologizing, and agreeing to everything the officer asks. And that right there is what gets people searched, arrested, and charged with crimes they could have walked away from. Hit subscribe right now, because what I am about to show you could be the difference between driving home tonight or sleeping in a jail cell. Cops are professionally trained to extract information and consent from drivers in the first 60 seconds of a stop, and most people have no idea it is even happening to them. Here is what you're going to learn in this video. 5 specific phrases backed by Supreme Court rulings that legally force officers to either write your ticket and let you go, or explain why they are keeping you there. I have analyzed over 200 body cam videos, and the drivers who know these phrases get released faster, searched less, and charged less often than everyone else. You are going to learn the exact words to say, why they work, and what happens when drivers do not use them. I'm also going to walk you through a real traffic stop scenario at the end, so you can see all 5 phrases working together in order. Let us talk about what is actually happening during a traffic stop. When an officer pulls you over, they are running a mental checklist in the first 60 seconds. They want to know if you're nervous. They want to know if you will comply with extra requests. They want to know if you will volunteer information you do not have to share. And they are trained to ask casual questions that sound friendly, but are actually building reasonable suspicion to keep you longer. Traffic stops legally have a defined endpoint. It ends when the officer gives you your ticket or warning and tells you you're free to go. That is it. But here's the trick they do not want you knowing. Everything that happens between the stop and that moment is a window where officers can extend the stop, request searches, and build cases. The 5 phrases in this video are legal tools that close that window fast. They do not make you look guilty. They do not make the officer angry. They simply remind both of you that the law exists, and you know it. Most drivers make the same 3 mistakes during a stop. They over-explain. They apologize excessively. And they answer questions they have zero legal obligation to answer. A driver says, "Sorry, officer. I did not realize I was speeding. I was just coming from my girlfriend's house. I am a little tired. I had a couple beers earlier, but that was like 3 hours ago." That driver just created reasonable suspicion, admitted potential impairment, and gave the officer more than enough to extend the stop. You do not have to do any of that. And once you know these 5 phrases, you will not. Here's the reality about the first phrase. It is the one that sets the tone for the entire stop. When an officer approaches your window and asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" almost every driver answers, "Honestly, I might have been going a little fast, or I think my registration might be expired." Stop doing that. You are not required to confess anything. You are not required to guess. And anything you say absolutely can be used against you. Here is exactly what you say instead. You look at the officer calmly and say, "I am not sure, officer." That is it. 3 words. I'm not sure. You're not lying. You're not being rude. You're simply not self-incriminating in the first 10 seconds of the stop. Defense attorneys use this exact approach in court. The driver who says, "I'm not sure," forces the officer to state the reason for the stop on record, which is information you want established clearly. The driver who says, "Oh yeah, I was probably speeding a little," just handed the officer a verbal admission before a single document has been checked. Bad way. A driver says, "Yeah, I think I was going a bit fast back there. Sorry about that." The officer writes that down, uses it in the citation, and it becomes evidence. Good way. A smart driver says, "I'm not sure, officer." The officer states the reason himself. The interaction stays professional, and the driver has not created any evidence against themselves. I have analyzed over 200 body cam videos, and this single phrase change affects the tone of the entire stop. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection in the first 30 seconds of any traffic stop. Have you ever been asked this question during a stop and answered it honestly without realizing you did not have to? Drop a comment below and tell me what you said, because I guarantee most of you have given that exact admission without knowing it. The second phrase is the most powerful one in this entire video, and it works because it draws on a hard line in 4th Amendment law. After an officer has checked your license, registration, and insurance, the stop legally should end unless they have independent, reasonable suspicion of another crime. But officers are trained to keep conversations going past that point. They will ask casual questions like, "Where are you headed tonight?" or "Do you mind if I ask you a few more questions?" This is the moment most drivers get trapped. Here is exactly what you say in this moment. After handing over your documents and waiting, once the officer starts asking questions beyond the stop itself, you say this: "Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" Those 9 words. Memorize them. That phrase forces the officer to make a legal decision on the spot. They must either tell you you are free to leave, in which case you thank them and go, or they must articulate specific reasonable suspicion to detain you further. They cannot legally keep you in a gray zone. This comes straight from the Supreme Court ruling in Rodriguez versus United States from 2015. The court ruled that officers cannot extend a traffic stop beyond the time needed to handle the reason for the stop without independent, reasonable suspicion. Your 9-word phrase invokes that ruling without you ever having to quote it. Bad way: a driver sits quietly while the officer asks where they're going, what they do for a living, who they were with tonight, and whether there is anything in the car. The driver answers everything. The stop extends 15 minutes, and eventually something gives the officer enough to search. Good way: a smart driver waits until the business of the stop is handled and says, "Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" The officer either releases them or must justify continued detention with specific articulable facts. Most officers, when faced with a driver who knows this phrase, will end the stop. Former police officers have confirmed this works exactly this way in real stops. Still with me? Good. Because this is where it gets serious, and most drivers completely lose control of what happens next. The third phrase handles one of the most dangerous moments in any traffic stop: the consent search request. Officers ask for permission to search your car in dozens of different ways. Do you mind if I take a look? You would not have a problem with me checking the back seat, right? I just need to do a quick look around, and then you will be on your way. These all sound casual. They all sound like refusing will make you look guilty. That is exactly what they are designed to sound like. This is 100% legal to refuse. And here is exactly what you say. You say this calmly and clearly: "I do not consent to any searches." 6 words. Say them once. Do not explain why. Do not apologize. Do not say, "I just do not feel comfortable with that," or "I would rather not," if that is okay. Just say, "I do not consent to any searches." This is 100% legal. The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches without a warrant. Giving consent waives that protection completely. Once you say yes, anything found becomes immediately usable against you. Once you say, "I do not consent to any searches," the officer needs either a warrant, probable cause, or an exception to proceed. Your non-consent does not give them any of those things. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection when an officer is standing at your window asking to look around. Bad way: a driver says, "Sure, go ahead, I've got nothing to hide." The officer finds a forgotten item, an old prescription bottle, a friend's backpack with something inside. What started as a nothing stop becomes an arrest. Good way: a smart driver says, "I do not consent to any searches." The officer must now either let the driver go or establish independent justification to search. The stop ends faster. The driver maintains every legal protection they have. Most people already clicked away at this point. If you're still here, you're already in the top 10% of drivers when it comes to knowing your rights. Drop a comment right now that says "still watching," because I want to know who is paying attention. This next phrase is the one that saved one of my subscribers from a case that could have cost her $20,000 in legal fees. The fourth phrase deals with what happens if an officer starts pushing harder after you have refused consent. Sometimes an officer will say, "We are going to get a dog out here, and if you have got nothing to hide, this will go a lot faster if you just let me look." This is pressure, and pressure is designed to make you cave. Here is exactly what you say: "I am happy to cooperate with a lawful order, but I do not consent to searches, and I am invoking my right to remain silent." Say that, the whole thing. You can memorize it in pieces. "I am happy to cooperate with a lawful order." That keeps you respectful and non-confrontational. "But I do not consent to searches." That maintains your Fourth Amendment protection. "And I am invoking my right to remain silent." That invokes the Fifth Amendment and legally signals that you are not going to answer further investigative questions. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings, including Berghuis versus Tompkins, which established that you must affirmatively invoke your right to silence. Just staying quiet is not enough in many jurisdictions. You have to say the words. Once you invoke, questioning must stop. Former police officers have confirmed this works, and that officers are trained to know exactly what it means when a driver says those words. Watch what happens when a driver uses this phrase. The pressure tactic stops. The officer either proceeds with independent justification, or they do not. The driver is no longer the source of evidence against themselves. Watch what happens when a driver does not use it. The officer keeps pressing. The driver gets flustered, says something inconsistent, and suddenly there's a discrepancy the officer can use to build suspicion. The fifth phrase is the one that wraps everything together and creates a clear legal record of the stop. When an officer is preparing to write your ticket or warning and the stop is coming to an end, you ask this. You say, "Am I free to go now?" That is it. 5 words. You ask it directly and calmly after the officer has returned your documents. This is 100% legal, and it serves 2 critical purposes. First, it signals clearly that you know the stop has a legal endpoint. Second, it creates a verbal record that you ask to leave, which matters enormously if the stop escalates and your attorney later reviews body cam footage. Here is the reality about these 5 phrases used together. They form a complete system. The first phrase stops you from self-incriminating at the start. The second phrase cuts off illegal extension of the stop. The third phrase protects you from warrantless searches. The fourth phrase shuts down pressure tactics and invokes your constitutional rights. The fifth phrase cleanly ends the stop on your terms. Defense attorneys use these exact lines in court to demonstrate that their client did not consent, did not waive rights, and did not give police legal justification to extend or search. Let me show you exactly how all 5 phrases work in a real traffic stop situation from start to finish. You are driving home on a Tuesday night, you roll through an intersection, and an officer activates their lights. You pull over safely. The officer walks up and says, "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" You say, "I am not sure, officer." That is phrase 1. The officer says, "You ran a red light," asks for your license, registration, and insurance. You hand them over without saying anything extra. The officer runs your documents and comes back. He says, "Everything checks out. I am just going to give you a warning tonight. But before I do, I want to ask you a couple questions. Where are you coming from?" You recognize this as the extension tactic. You say, "Am I free to go or am I being detained?" That is phrase 2. The officer pauses and says, "I just have a couple of questions." You say calmly, "I would rather not answer questions, but I'm happy to cooperate with a lawful order." The officer then says, "You mind if I take a quick look in your car?" You say, "I do not consent to any searches." Phrase 3. The officer pushes a little, says it will just take a second and might save you some trouble. You say, "I am happy to cooperate with a lawful order, but I do not consent to searches, and I am invoking my right to remain silent." That is phrase 4. There is a pause. The officer says, "All right, here's your warning. You are free to go." You take the warning and say, "Am I free to go now?" Phrase 5. The officer confirms yes. You say thank you and you drive away. That whole stop just ended in under 2 minutes. No search, no escalation, no arrest, no evidence created against you. Just a warning and you back on the road. Most people have no idea that every single one of those phrases has a direct legal basis that officers are trained to recognize. Next week, I'm dropping the video on exactly what to say when an officer claims they smell marijuana. Subscribe right now because that one video has more legal landmines than anything I've covered so far, and it gets people arrested every single day. If you are not subscribed, you will miss it, and you need it before you ever get pulled over again. Let us do a quick recap of what you learned today. The first phrase, "I am not sure, officer," stops you from self-incriminating before anything else happens. The second phrase, "Am I free to go or am I being detained?" invokes your Rodriguez rights and legally forces officers to end or justify the stop. The third phrase, "I do not consent to any searches," protects your Fourth Amendment rights and prevents warrantless searches. The fourth phrase, "I'm invoking my right to remain silent," shuts down pressure tactics using the Fifth Amendment. And the fifth phrase, "Am I free to go now?" creates a clean verbal record and signals the legal end of the stop. These are not tricks. They are not ways to hide guilt. They are constitutional rights that every single driver in this country is legally entitled to use every single time. Hit subscribe right now so you catch the marijuana stop video the moment it drops, because that one changes everything.